Did we draw inspiration from other movements? 110%. Feminists across the continent have been mobilizing and working towards demanding for their full humanity for a very long time. And it didn't even start with only Me Too, right? Like, we can think far back at the different protests that women have staged in this country, right? I mean, look at Stella Nyanzi herself. Right before she organized the Women's March with us, she was also protesting injustice, you see, yeah? So women have been protesting and resisting, and so we draw a lot of inspiration from all the people across who are resisting in all the ways they are.
Women love to talk about their vaginas. They do. Mainly because no one's ever asked them before.
From the minute I started performing it, it was just one of those amazing things. People just responded. The play really started to take off in all different forms. It was shocking to me. I have to tell you, it's still shocking to me.
Respect this vagina.
I started to realize that the play could be a tool for breaking taboos, for getting dialogue going. We then created this idea of V-Day, Vagina Day, Victory Day, Valentine's Day. We were thinking we'd do one performance in New York City to raise money for local groups working to stop domestic violence. That event ended up to be the most extraordinary evening where 2,500 people came and all these fabulous actors, from Glenn Close to Susan Sarandon to Lily Tomlin to Rosie Perez.
My vagina is angry. It is. It's pissed off. My vagina is furious and it needs to talk.
The Vagina Monologues in Uganda, we first tried to stage it in 2005, and it was banned by the, the Media Council at the time, and there was a lot of backlash about it. In a way, it was a very difficult process. But it was also a very good one in the sense that it awoke many of us to precisely what it was that we were up against. At the time, I think there was a bit of complacency in the women's movement because we had achieved certain things. There were girls in education. You didn't have to make a case for girls going into education. You didn't have to make a case for, women going into certain professions. What was critical at the time, and what many feminists had spoken about at the time, were that some of the pillars of patriarchy were not being addressed by the women's movement. And a key pillar around that was the issue of what is called in the movement bodily integrity, as in who owns the bodies of women and the bodies of gender non-conforming persons. Who has the choice? Who is the determinant of choice for sex, for pleasure, for choice of partner, and all of these things. And at the time, of course, the issue of violence against women, sexual violence against women, was a really serious matter. And it was being addressed, but not in a concrete, in-your-face way that determined the woman's right to decide how she saw her body and how she wanted to take control of her body. And so the play, as you know, was written by Eve Ensler, a woman who had spoken to women from all over the world about the experiences of their bodies and particularly their vaginas. And what the play revealed was that we've all been raised to think of our vaginas as dirty, as evil, as, to be controlled, to be punished, to be mutilated, all of these things. And so the play was giving voice to that, societal attitudes to the bodies of women and to women's sexuality. It was giving voice to that. And we in Uganda, or at least a few of us, felt that this was a play that was global in what it was trying to do. It was really trying to revolutionize the space by giving women an opportunity, women and gender non-conforming peoples, the opportunity to speak in their own words about their experiences. And so we were naive in a way. We thought we would do this play. Maybe if we were lucky, a few people would turn up. And then, the methodology was the play is done and then you have a series of discussions about it. And so we were very naive and thought, this is the way it's going to be done. In retrospect, we should have anticipated that there would be a huge backlash because the very issue around women's autonomy to speak about their bodies and their sexuality is such a taboo subject, even for many women themselves. So the women's movement was, as I call it, divided, and I think shaped in a way the women's movement of that generation was divided and I think shaped by that play and by the discussions that came afterwards. Some of the backlash leveled against us was that we were mimicking women from the West, that we weren't speaking as African women, that these weren't the stories of African women. And the play was written by a white woman, but she had spoken to women from all over the world. And we said, if we are saying it makes sense to us and it speaks for our experience, then that's fine. Leave us to it. We don't need you to paternalistically save us from ourselves. What we need is saving from you, actually. Why are we bashing each other as women? We may not agree with what we're doing with one another, but why are we publicly bashing each other? And so we developed things like, okay, if you can't support it, if it's affecting women, if you can't support it, don't oppose it. Or find channels to do it, not to bash one another in public. And then some women came to an awakening and said, actually, this is very true. I can't talk about women without talking about women in their totality, which is their sexuality as well, which is one of the last bastions that patriarchy shows us to completely mistrust about ourselves, and which is not African, by the way, because in many traditions, sexuality is part of who you are. Yeah. It's part of who you are. Yeah.
In 1995, I started African Women Development Fund together with two other women, Bisi Adele Fayeme, who is still alive in Nigeria, and Joanna Foster, who passed away a few years ago. And before that, I had started, as you rightly say, another organization. And before that, I had actually started a counseling program in Makerere University together with another counselor. And for me, it's never been a challenge. I'll tell you what makes me do those things. And therefore, it's not a challenge. I call it feminist rage. When something I see is painful, and is painful for women, I try to turn the rage into action. So the African Women's Development Fund was a result of my rage at hearing women in Dakar saying that the African convening was badly organized because they didn't have money. And for a week I kept saying, how can we be so poorly organized and the excuse is money? And then I met another woman, Joanna Foster, in the same convening. And we just said, we can actually start an African Women's Fund and support women's organizing. And then we also met Bisi Adele, who had been thinking about the same thing. And so we said, we can't have too many African women's funds. Let's work together.
They picked some women who had who were professionals, technical people like agriculture. Rightly so, they chose Victoria Sectorial. And they all very all absorbed in agriculture. Up to now, although she's no longer in parliament, Joyce Hispanga was picked for education. But when they invited other people to go into elections, there wasn't worldwide elections, district to district. I offered myself. But I'd like to say that it's not guts, it's not what I just felt it's possible. I felt I needed again to see that the country must be repaired. At the beginning, I thought it was reconstructed, but didn't last long, and then it was again destroyed somehow. Women have not been the leaders of the world, as we can see now. But those who went to boys' schools, there's not only me, they also ventured into what were called men's, who went to education schools when they started to introduce, to get women into the schools like Budo, Namasagari, Nabomari. So far, those are the ones traditionally that were there. The girls who went from Budo, it was the girls from Budo, were the first ones to join courses which were basically originally men, like pharmacy. The first girl to join pharmacy, there were two. One studied, applied to go for it, sponsored them, Bristol and Manchester, and Mubanda and Catherine Kisumba in Bristol. The girl who did dispenser as Margaret in Twata, but she did it here as a dispenser. Before, when I was growing up, the dispenser who gave you medicines at the hospital, they were also always men. The first policewoman was Jenny Nakabiri. Fortunately, she's still around. Was Jenny Nakabiri, the first policewoman. So just to show you an example of women who dared to go into a man's world.
Marching for a safer Uganda, the Women's Lives Matter demonstration brought hundreds of people out onto the streets of Kampala. The protest followed a series of murders of women in Uganda and no convictions.
Can the people of all genders come together and realize they are killing us, they are stealing our children. They've been doing it for the last, I don't know how long. But now we must come together and we must shout about it.
We want meaningful action. We'd like a team set up to investigate these murders and report back to the public and to the family members who killed these women.
So these are actually pictures from the Women's March, taking Twitter feminism to the streets. This is an interesting one because, you know, that's how the trolls used to say, oh, blah, blah, blah. All you do is tweet. And here we are. This is also from the Women's March. Fake the patriarchy because, you know, yeah. Oh, I wonder if I should credit who shot them.
Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, these two were actually shot by pipes, and I did ask him for permission before I put them up. So pipes came and he shot theirs and he allowed me to have them after. I would really like to give credit to Stella Nyanzi because she really is the one who came up with this idea and rallied us all to begin organizing around the Women's March. And that's how we formed the working group, which is comprised of many people. It's not just myself. There's so many people who contributed to that and to it happening in the ways it did. Firstly, it was an interesting time, right? We were at the height of Me Too. We had women who were being murdered and their bodies dumped in the street, and we were receiving absolutely no concrete feedback from the government, right? They just seemed to, there was a lot of trivialization of the matter. So I think that it happened at a time when people were just fed up. And so when we began to organize the march, actually, there are many times when I wasn't sure that people were going to show up because, you know, we know how tricky it is to be able to politically demonstrate in this country. And actually, until the day of, we hadn't gotten permission to be able to do it. But people were committing to show up nonetheless because we were tired. Women were being killed and we were saying our lives matter. It was important for women to be the ones organizing this march because we were saying we're taking matters into our own hands. If the state has failed us and the state's core responsibility is protection of life, then we're taking matters into our own hands. And I think that's why for me, it was I think the Women's March is one of those moments that many, many years from now we'll be looking back and saying we did that. So I think that's why young people showed up in the ways they did, because they could see themselves, right? It had gotten to a point where we were feeling unsafe. You didn't know if you were next. And so that's really what they were protesting. And that's why we said our women's lives matter, and it was important that the state and all the institutions that be understand that.
So here is a chapter from Pleasure Activism. It's a book, again, talking about bringing the joy and the whole of who we are into our activism, celebrating who we are, and every single part of us, including our sexuality. So here is a quote from Audre Lorde. The erotic, that is our sexuality, who we are as women, is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feeling. In order to perpetuate itself, every oppression must corrupt or distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change. She's really suggesting that this divorce, or this is what I make of what this is saying, that the way we have been completely delinked and raised to mistrust the power of our sexuality, the power of our joy, of our whole being as women, has taken away from our being able to fully enjoy the power that we have to create the change that we need. And that this is part of what patriarchal cooptation does. It labels you as unreliable, it labels you as evil, something not to be trusted, which we've all learnt to do to some extent. And in my view is the cause of so much unhappiness in so many people. And this person, Adrian, is saying that, you know, the rediscovery of ourselves and who all that is will create more joy. And if we have more joy and acceptance of who we are, it's very hard to inflict pain on others, and it's also much easier to accept them. Yeah. So this is a must read for everybody who is interested in this work.